TIFU by reading contract law textbooks to my 2-year-old. Obligatory. This happened 7 years ago, as my son is now 9, and this decision has now come back to haunt us. Background filler: I graduated law school in December 2007 and passed the bar exam in February 2008. I kept my Barbary materials as I was going to trade with a friend who took the bar in a state I was debating taking it in, but that never worked out, so they remained in the office. Story: our son was born in 2009 and this happened in 2011-12. He was not any easy child to get to go to bed and we would often read to him for hours. One night I had enough and decided to find the most boring thing I could, so I pulled out my Barbary book on contracts and started reading it. He was fascinated and demanded I read more and more. He'd ask questions. Like any good dad, I answered. So I was teaching my 5 to 3-year-old contract law, and eventually more advanced contract law. Fast forward to kindergarten. He got upset with his teacher one day because she entered into a verbal contract to give them an extra recess if they did X and Y. Well, they did, but it rained, so she couldn't give them the time. This did not sit well, as our son proceeded to lecture her on the elements of a verbal contract and how one was created, and she breached it. She had no answer for him, and we had a talk about it with her. Unfortunately, this behavior didn't stop. He would negotiate with adults for things he wanted, and if he felt he performed his side of the contract, he would get angry if they breached. He will explain to them what the offer was, how he accepted it, and what was the consideration. And if they were the ones who made the offer, he would point out any ambiguity was in his favor. When they tried pointing out kids can't enter contracts, he counters with, if an adult offers the contract, they must perform their part if the child did their part, and they cannot use them being a child to withhold performance. This eventually progressed to him negotiating contracts and deals with his classmates in 2nd grade. Only now he knew to put things in writing, and would get his friends to sign promissory notes. He started doing this when they started doing word problems in math. He knew these weren't enforceable, but would point out his friends did not know this. We eventually got him to stop this by understanding he couldn't be mad because he knows they can't form a contract. It culminated in 3rd grade when he negotiated with his teacher to have an extra recess. This time, he remembered to have her agree that she would honor it later if it rained, which it did. So then she said she wouldn't, and he lost it and had to see the principal, who agreed with him and talked to the teacher. Now that this happened, we had to also see the principal to discuss this. She is astounded how good he is at this, but acknowledges we need to put a stop to it. So it is now put in his education plan that adults cannot engage in negotiation with him, as he is adept at contract formation and tricking adults into entering verbal contracts. TLDR, I taught my 2 to 3-year-old contract law out of desperation to get him to go to bed. When he got to school, he used these skills to play adults. When I say put a stop to it, I mean the outbursts when adults don't meet their obligations in his eyes. The principal encourages him to talk out solutions and to find compromise. Edit 2, clarified the timeline and added context. Not quite at this level, but I had a discussion with my dad when I was about 6 to 7 about why businesses were where they were, and houses were where they were, etc. And of course he tells me about residential zoning and business districts and a bunch of other things of that type. Then one day in 2nd grade, the teacher was reading a story, and in the story, someone opened a business in a neighborhood. Apparently, me asking about the zoning of the residential area really threw her off.
Stop playing SimCity and learn about mixed-use zoning.
I admit that I find it somewhat hard to believe, but it's definitely a funny story either way. XD.
I'm glad someone said it right. 2 to 3-year-old learning about contract law.
Aside from outbursts when an adult fails to honor a contract, not really seeing a huge problem here. Kinda sounds like maybe the primary lesson might be for the teachers to stop taking the easy route and making dishonest deals with kids, which they have no intention of honoring, in order to get the desired behavior out of the children. That the other children are either not developed enough to detect the dishonesty, or too timid to speak out against it, should not excuse dishonesty. At the very least, being dishonest with the kids is sending several subtle messages to the kids on subjects such as teachers, authority figures, cannot be trusted, etc. Banana more like TIFU by making a banana beast.
Maybe this isn't even a banana up.
I can't help but think all his classmates stood up and clapped. TIFU by kicking a chestnut, stopping traffic for an hour and getting cornered by a lynch mob. So obligatory this happened yesterday, but I'm still traumatized as I've never really encountered confrontation on such a big scale. So let me set the scene first. Live and grew up in a fairly densely populated city in Europe that has a good amount of nature patches. The people are genuinely quite friendly and usually not too short-tempered unless strangers, a.k.a. non-locals, are involved. The location of this FU was a pretty busy junction just down the road of my flat, think 2 car lanes, cycling lanes, and pedestrian crossing. Anyway, it was just before rush hour, around 4 PM, and the sun was grilling everyone in Europe. Climate change, yay. For the past 3 weeks, I was strolling down the road towards the junction, completely blanking my surrounding as I was trying to come up with the perfect dish to surprise my GF in the evening. Picture that quiet guy just minding his own business, head down, focusing on every single step. Yep, that's me. Suddenly, I bumped my head into a rock, or so I initially thought. I look up. It was the largest man I've ever seen, about the size of the mountain from God. He looked like a bodybuilder on steroids with a side of extra muscle. Let's call him Arnie. I was startled for a second before I see his buddy, let's call him SLY, who was quite a bit shorter but just as wide as he was tall, so still quite intimidating for an under-the-radar guy like me. Oi, watch where you are going, I bellow. JK, obviously Arnie did. So being super alpha and dominant, I mumble sorry and move around them to continue my walk to the supermarket. I mean, how the F / was I meant to walk past them when they literally block the whole pavement standing next to each other? I think and kick a chestnut out of frustration, metaphorically releasing and passing on all my problems. And oh boy, that worked. Somewhat. What happened next I could not have imagined in 1,000 lifetimes. Hey, I mean, even with the current AI technology, I doubt they would have been able to predict that outcome. I see the chestnut flying Roberto Carlos style towards the junction. Hell, I heard the crowd roaring, and it probably even broke the sound barrier. While the chestnut was still in flight, I raise my hand in pride, having reclaimed my manliness with this superb treasure of a shot. And I'm talking the eager please pick me Keen Bean Susan from middle school hand raise. No, Susan Mayonnaise is not an instrument. Suddenly everything kept coming down. The chestnut flew past a motorcyclist, around 3 feet high, who must have registered some kind of movement in front of him, and he immediately hit the brake. Remember how I said they had nature patches in the city? Well, the city installed sprinklers to keep the grass hydrated and green, but they somehow have their own spirit and love releasing water into the most inconvenient directions. You guessed it, despite almost 40 degrees Celsius, there was a puddle the size of a small American town right there in front of the braking motorcyclist. His braking turns into sliding, into rotating, into falling, and finally into that metal to asphalt screeching halting. Behind him, a red car doesn't manage to brake in time but does a Fast and the Furious drift and slides past the motorcycle, also coming to a halt in the middle of the crossing around 5 meters away from the motorcyclist. Then my attention is caught by the opposing lane as the red car just cut off a blue car's path, who does the same drift, thanks to the puddle, and ends up head-on with the bumper wrapped around the traffic light post. By a miracle of God, or chance for the atheists, the post was harder than a zucchini after a 2-week dry period and withstood the incident without giving in. Yet the 10 or so pedestrians waiting behind it scattered away, with 2 stumbling over each other and falling flat-faced. What followed after this was the loudest concert of honking cars and screaming, followed by screeching brakes from all directions. And then a split second of silence, until I hear a majestic roaring that Simba would be proud of. Dude, what the coconut? Yup. Arnie and Sly walk up behind me and instantly get the attention of about another 10 surrounding pedestrians that just at that moment exited the supermarket next to me. They start to explain what they saw to the others, me causing this accident on purpose and celebrating, and suddenly an elderly man, let's call him Miyagi, grabbed my wrist with the iron grip of a Cyberman. At that moment my life flashed in front of my eyes. My future, my spotless criminal record, my clumsy soap handling skills, and my virgin cheesecake. I was not going to make it a single night in prison. Suddenly the commotion starts. Picture a Real Madrid versus Barcelona team versus team fight. All traffic stops. everyone gets out of their cars and comes towards our little ensemble, shouting. I've never seen a crowd agree that fast on anything, but within 30 seconds everyone was pointing at me with red faces, anger in their eyes, and most of them looked like they were going to release their Super Saiyan form on me while I was still trying to flee Miyagi's claws. I know, statistically not all of them could have been Super Saiyans, but still. What I haven't mentioned yet is that I actually look fairly mixed race and live in a very white neighborhood, so within another 30 seconds many of the screams were more racist than incident related. Immigration and progressive Europe, yay. Throughout I just kept silent and head down as about 30 people by now were surrounding me, still triangled by Arnie, Sly, and Miyagi, so that my voice would have drowned anyway. After about another 5 minutes, which felt like an eternity, the golden opportunity arrived. I think Sly took some pity with me and signaled a countdown with his left hand so only I could see, and pointed into his direction. I am no fighter, but I took one class of Wing Chun back in high school, and in a spark of genius it all came back to me that moment. Trap the dragon's head, the tail bites. Trap the tail, the head bites. As Sly got down to his last finger, I do the kung fu twist with my arm, break Miyagi's iron grip around my wrist and start dashing towards Sly. For a split second I thought I'd run into a muscle wall for the second time this day, but in the last moment, he moved his 300 pounds out of the way with the swiftness of a ballerina. Cheesecake. I was impressed. Then the sprint of a lifetime started. I was Powell, Bolt, and Blake at the same time. I ran like my button-out depended on it. Well, it kinda did. Luckily the mob never bothered to stand behind Arnie and Sly, cause they figured I'd never get past them, so I didn't actually have to tackle anyone on my escape, no potential assault charges, yay, and continue down the road. I see some people follow me, pretty sure they had no clue about the chestnut, but they just thought I was somehow involved. So I kept running and I had a good 100 meters head start. I was just in front of my apartment block when I had the second spark of genius of the day. There was no way I would show them where I lived, so I ran for another 10 minutes further than any man has run ever before, about 2 kilometers, until I reached a park to lie down. I was pretty sure that I lost most people when I passed my flat, thank God for the heat, but I had to be sure. I cooled down and called my neighbor whose flat looks down on the junction. I told her the whole story. She's a super old family friend, and she couldn't believe I was the guy sprinting away. She was sunning on her terrace. Turns out the motorcyclist got up without injury and the blue and red car drivers weren't harmed either. According to my neighbor, the cops and ambulance were called and they took down the details of all drivers, moved the blue car and treated the 2 pedestrians for about an hour, while all traffic was stopped. Something I didn't realize from my POV was that a second mob formed simultaneously around the motorcyclist after the crash, who blamed him for everything, cause it looked like he just couldn't drive. And guess what, he was a foreigner, so that box was checked. His insurance will probably cover everything, at least that's what my conscience tells me. I haven't left my flat of fear being recognized at the supermarket. My GF was a bit pissed that I made frozen pizza, and I promised myself to never kick a chestnut again. TL Doctor kicked a chestnut, distracted a motorcyclist, got out of hand and caused a crash. Got blamed by a lot of clueless people, escaped running. Edit, submitted this around midnight and went to bed to wake up to a blowing up inbox. Thanks guys. Also thank you so much for the gold. I put somewhere in the comments that excessive humor is my coping mechanism to deal with things. I apologize if that style really wasn't your jam and will work on semantics for the future. If you did enjoy it, you're welcome. We probably could make great friends in RL. And yes, English is not my mother tongue, and I lived all around, so that's why my units of space and mass are very all over the place. Congratulations /you/Mitchie say boss 123. This post has been voted by our community Discord channel as the fuck up of the week. Wow, yeah, my day was boring. You need to improve your situational awareness or you will not survive the zombie apocalypse.
At least he's demonstrated his skill at cardio.
Jeez man, I think you've turned kicking chestnuts into a new idiom for coconut up.
Honestly, I really like this idiom. It's got a nice ring to it.
At least you didn't zucchini the chestnut.
Oh, please don't give anyone good ideas.
TIFU by getting so high I thought I predicted my own death. This happened last night in a 420 legal state, so no laws were broken in the making of this TIFU burner because reasons. After taking a break from smoking for a few months, I decided to break out an indica hybrid vape cartridge I bought a while ago and let the good times roll. Been hitting it the past few days, and each time I get higher than a kite because my tolerance is so low now and I don't know when to stop hitting it. I was on Facebook yesterday morning when I was sober, and in one of my meme groups saw a screenshot of a post about a 23-year-old college student who died after eating pasta that had been left out 5 days. The top comment on it was "he passed away," and that just stuck with me because it was so funny. Later that night, I was cleaning out my fridge and came across 2 containers of food I had brought back with me from home. I'm a college senior and the semester started 2 weeks ago. One of the containers was a tortellini salad, and I noticed it had a sell-by date of 4 days before. I was about to throw it out, then decided to smell it and try a piece given the proximity of the sell-by date. I had one piece of tortellini, decided it might be alright, and put it back to figure it out later. A few hours later, the high times have come and I'm hitting my vape pen. After watching a Rodney Dangerfield classic, I go up to bed and am lying there when all of a sudden I start feeling a sense of doom. I start imagining every hypochondriac symptom in the book, from chest pain, to stomach pain, to shortness of breath, etc. At the same time, all I could see in my head was he passed away and started thinking that I was an almost 23-year-old college senior and I ate pasta that was approximately 5 days expired. I suddenly realized that I never saw the guy's name or where it happened in the screenshot, and started freaking out thinking it was about me. Shortly thereafter the EMT side of me takes over, checks that I have a pulse when I've pretty much convinced myself my heart has stopped, and I basically run an out-of-body patient assessment on myself to make sure I'm alive. I fell asleep, and just woke up after 12 hours. Doctor got so high I thought I had seen my own death before it happened. Pastor Duchy on the left-hand side. One of the nice side effects of not smoking anymore is not longer having to convince myself I'm not dying every so often.
On the opposite side of the coin, learning to deal with those paranoid anxiety thoughts while high has helped me learn to cope with anxiety while sober.
Ha 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 ha. This is great. Sorry, man. Nobody said pasta la vista? Yeah, we've all seen the time knife. Carrot edit. Oh wow, thanks for my first Reddit silver.